Authorities in Russia have widened evacuation orders in 2 border regions as Ukrainian troops press on with a major cross-border incursion. The governor of one district, Belgorod, has told residents to relocate, and evacuation orders have expanded in neighbouring Kursk. Russia says Ukrainian troops have advanced as much as 30 kilometres across the border. The surprise move, which began in Kursk, marks the largest Ukrainian attack on Russian soil since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began.
Russia's civil defense ministry says 13 people were injured when a Ukrainian missile, shot down by Russian air defenses, fell on this residential building in Kursk. More than 76,000 people have been evacuated in the Kursk region as Ukrainian troops push further into its territory.
80 people and 16 pieces of equipment arrived. This is not our first operation.
The Russian army claims it hit Ukrainian units in areas up to 30 kilometers inside its territory. It released images of what it says are strikes on a Ukrainian tank in the Kursk region. On the weekend, Kyiv acknowledged the incursion on Russian territory, which began last week.
Today, Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi has already reported several times on the frontline situation and on our actions to push the war out into the aggressor's territory. I thank every unit of our defense forces that makes this happen.
In Ukraine, the offensive has provided a boost in morale to the war-weary population, even as many near the Russian border are forced to leave their homes for their own safety.
I feel great, really good. Let them find out what it's like. They don't understand what war is. Let them get a taste of it.
Kyiv, however, has not explained its strategic aim with the incursion into Russia. But Ukraine's attack on the Kursk region draw away attention from other frontline areas, where Russia appears to make slow but sustained advances.
Well, Frank Ledwidge is a former UK military intelligence officer who now lectures in strategic studies at Portsmouth University in England. He joins us from Oxford. Welcome back to DW, Frank. What do you think is behind these Ukrainian incursions?
Well, good morning. It does seem now that we're looking at a major incursion of about 5 brigades, so 10 to 15,000 people or elements of 5 brigades. And not only that, but they are well equipped. They're well equipped with the latest Western gear, artillery, rocket systems, and so forth. So this is not a sort of raid-in force. That's the first thing. So what's the purpose? Well, it seems that the primary purpose, which is succeeding, is to shift the narrative, shift the story, message that Ukraine is capable still, despite being under pressure in the south, of conducting effective offensive operations. So that's at the political level. They're capable still of effective assaults on Russian forces, and destabilizing them. And the fact we're talking about this in this way shows that that is succeeding as far as it goes.
OK. How does, beyond that, how does it advance anyone's war games? It's, from what you've said, it sounds like Ukraine is saying we're still in the game, but the thing is still locked in place.
Yes, and it's very early days to say where this will go. The main operational objective of this, and strategic objective, is to change the political story, change things. We're on the front foot, as Nick said. But at operational level, I suspect one of the purposes, at least, was to attempt to draw not only attention away from the embattled fronts in the south and east, but to draw Russian reinforcements away, to call Russia's bluff, say, look, how much do you really want to defend your territory? At the moment, it seems that the Russians are not biting with respect to that. They're not pulling forces from other places. They have plenty of reserves within metropolitan Russia itself, not least, by the way, in Army Group North, which is the area of operations of the Russian army that the Ukrainians have smashed into, the headquarters of which is, I understand, in Belgorod. So they're fighting towards Kharkiv, whilst the Ukrainians are fighting effectively towards, although they won't get near, Kursk. So the high likelihood is that if army reinforcements are drawn from elsewhere, it'll be from that front, the Kharkiv front, not the really under pressure southern front. But we'll see. The Russians have made big mistakes before. It would be a big mistake to do that, in my view. Also, just one other thing. It does seem that there are reports that the FSB, the Federal Security Bureau, the old KGB, if you like, have been put in charge of running this operation as an internal security matter. I don't know what the significance of that. We'll find out. But really, this is early days in this week-old operation, and it's too early to say how it will go or how it is.
And can Ukraine sustain this advance towards Belgorod and Kursk?
That's the key question. When will their drive culminate? I think we're there or near there now. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If the Ukrainians outrun their logistics, if they get too far into Russia, if they get bogged down, that will be bad news. I suspect that they've planned this really well. They don't want a repeat of the counteroffensive last year. We're talking about half the forces deployed in this attack as were deployed last year, but they'll be far better prepared for this. Planning will be far more realistic. So I suspect they're unlikely to get bogged down. One option, of course, is just to come right out again if things get troublesome and the narrative shifts. We don't know. But the one thing they have to avoid is running beyond the logistics, because people invading Russia doing that find that it doesn't end well.
And as Ukraine invades Russia, can you see Russia escalating this from this so-called special military operation into an actual war?
I can't see them needing to do that. First of all, that would buy into the Ukrainian narrative. But secondly, they don't need to. They've got no problems at the moment with manpower. They're getting volunteers in. Ukraine does have problems with manpower, and I suspect there are certain views being expressed in the south and east of the country where troops are under pressure as to why it is those five their better brigades of the army have been deployed into Russia when they could be perhaps more usefully deployed to the south. So no, the Russians, I don't see them changing that. But that's Putin's decision, and I can't look at, nor can anyone else look inside his head. Would buy into the Ukrainian narrative effectively.
Fascinating analysis, Frank, and we thank you for it. Military analyst Frank Ledwidge.
My pleasure, thank you.
Our correspondent in Kyiv, Nick Connolly, joins us. Nick, bring us up to date on the Ukrainian offensive into Russia.
Look, I think we were all expecting that almost a week in we would have a better handle on what exactly is going on in Kursk region, but it seems more or less to be the opposite situation. We've had a clampdown from Russian authorities on civilians posting stuff to social media, so those videos we had in the first few days of destroyed Russian army kind of convoys, those have stopped. Similar situation with so-called military bloggers, these bloggers who are close to the Russian military, who were pretty, kind of panicked and beating the drum that the Russian government wasn't taking this seriously in the first few days. They have quietened down and fallen into line. And the Ukrainian side is keeping very tight-lipped. When we do get stuff posted by Ukrainian soldiers, it often seems to be a couple of days out of date. But it does still seem to be the case that Ukrainian forces are about 30 kilometers deep into Russia in the Kursk region. We've had reports of incursions at other places along the border in Belgorod region and in other parts of Kursk region, and there is a sense that Ukraine is on a roll. We've had reports by analysts saying that Russia had built defenses in this part of its border with Ukraine, but that there just weren't enough boots on the ground and enough munitions and other equipment there to actually make those defenses work. So basically, once the Ukrainian soldiers had passed those first defensive lines, they could basically take as much territory as they wanted and didn't really find much in the way of Russian soldiers. And if there were there, they were most likely conscripts, people in their early 20s with no fighting experience from the front lines, who weren't able to put up much of a fight.
And this is the biggest Ukrainian incursion of its type in this war. What could it achieve?
Well, President Zelensky has kept very quiet. He hasn't given any kind of broader aims to this. He's just talked about basically giving Russia a taste of its own medicine. I think they are very conscious of the fact that they put too high expectations on the counteroffensive last year, and they were basically trailing it for months before it actually happened, and then were unable to meet expectations. This time I think it's pretty opportunistic, just seeing how much territory they can take. Obviously this is great for morale in Ukraine after months of bad news. It's also very bad for morale in Russia. Obviously, Vladimir Putin basically unable to secure his own country's borders, let alone take control of Ukraine. So that is a win for Ukraine. Also internationally, it shows Western countries who maybe thought that Ukraine was basically running out of steam, that there is still a resource kind of base there. I think they're also hoping to force the Russians to take troops away from the front lines in the east of Ukraine, in Donetsk region, where the Russians have been really pushing forward. We've had reports that Russia is having to move its planes, its aviation, that has been crucial to its advantage on the ground, to Kursk region, and there are now increasing reports of soldiers being moved from the kind of less high priority parts of the front lines in Ukraine, not yet from places like Pokrovsk or Chasiv Yar. Obviously this will take time, that's not something that happens within a couple of days, but the hope is that this could really allow Ukrainian troops in the east that have been suffering to basically have a break and to have less of a Russian supremacy kind of opposite them, and potentially that's been the suspicion that this could also be some kind of swap in future, that Ukraine takes territory in Russia to then offer as a trade for Russian-occupied Ukraine. All of these things are still speculative, but for now, I think given the kind of seemingly relatively small investment in terms of resources and manpower, I think this is going better than most Ukrainian observers would have expected just a few days ago.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you very much for the analysis.